Parents who ignored abuse are unlikely to take responsibility ever, but you can heal anyway. It's not a coincidence that parents who overlooked or condoned or committed the abuse against you when you were a kid can't look you in the eye and admit responsibility now. Very few are ever going to admit responsibility or apologize. They didn't do it when you were a kid, and they're not likely to do it now. And it can be so devastating to be ignored or gaslit or belittled when you finally do try to talk to parents about what happened. And then in many cases, it really does more harm than good to your healing to even try to have that conversation. And yet, healing is possible for you, whether or not the guilty parties ever admit what they did. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Leah, and she writes, "Hello, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse by multiple people. So just a heads up, I am going to edit out some of the specifics of the abuse, but there's enough there for you to understand more or less what happened, all right? My first abuser was my eldest brother, who is 11 years older than me and first abused me when I was 3, so he was 14. As a Christian, I was taught about forgiveness, and I really feel that I have forgiven him. He was still a child and a victim of terrible abuse himself. I've got my fairy pencil here. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to on a second reading, but right now I'm just going to read through the letter so I can see what it's about. All right. The problem really begins with the fact that my parents knew about his abuse but never sought help for him. They knew that he had dysfunctional behaviors and often did things to hurt his 6 younger siblings. He even attempted to kill our entire family by removing the lug nuts off of the car tire. Luckily, my father discovered it before tragedy struck. This same brother came home with matches the day our elderly neighbor's mobile home burned down, but she wouldn't even consider blaming him because he could be a very charming boy and she loved him. The brother got involved in other illegal activities and began using drugs at a young age. My father, who had an authoritarian parenting style, told him to straighten up or leave, and he chose to leave, going back to his birth mother, who was responsible for allowing her boyfriends to molest him when he was little. When I was 9 and he was 20, he came home for a summer and brought with him a man who was probably in his 30s, and that man proceeded to groom and ultimately abuse me for the majority of that summer. During that time, my father must have sensed something wasn't right because he interrogated me several times about whether the man had done anything, quote, inappropriate with me. Given the fact that the man had convinced me that he loved me, quote, and that he would surely go to prison if anyone found out about it, and the fact that my father had a hot temper, owned guns, and I knew that if he found out, he might shoot the man and then go to prison himself, I felt that I had no choice but to keep quiet. My father was not a loving man. He would sometimes hug me, but he wouldn't kiss my cheek unless I washed my face first, and then it was a little peck, which made me feel like I was a dirty child. He had a history of doling out heavy-handed spankings, and he had a habit of calling me names of people he hated. I didn't realize until I was in my 40s that he fits the description of a covert narcissist/religious narcissist. All this is to explain why at 9 years old I denied my abuse and lied to my father. I was sure that I would be blamed for the abuse and for destroying our family. My abuser left abruptly after my older sister told my father one small detail of abuse that actually had never happened. When my father interrogated me in front of him and my mother, I felt terrified and frozen. And when my father continued to aggressively question me, I blurted out, "Yes," because I felt that was what he wanted to hear. As my abuser walked away, my mother told me to run and say goodbye. When I did, my abuser wouldn't speak to me. He just looked at me like I had hurt him deeply, and I felt like a terrible person. Later that year, I told my older sister what he had actually done to me, and she convinced me to let her tell our mom. Afterward, my mother began to question me, but I felt that she was angry with me, so I clammed up, and she never asked me about it again. Fast forward through my teens and early adulthood, which were filled with drama and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. through years of living at home with parents who yelled and screamed and threatened to divorce each other so regularly that all of the children grew accustomed to it, and through my father's obsession with the government and numberless conspiracies, through living in poverty on a boat for years, and somehow, by some miracle, I married a man who is truly an amazing person and who loves and supports me. The problem is, my parents are obsessed with the fact that I won't allow my abuser back into my life or around any of my children. They're convinced that true forgiveness means you welcome the person back with open arms. They quietly but persistently urged me to, quote, forgive my half-brother, and even convinced him to call me to apologize. But sadly, his phone call didn't go well, and after telling me things happened 20 years ago, and I just don't understand you, he hung up. And he told my parents that he'd apologized to me, but that I had rejected his apology. I became the black sheep. I tried to have healthy boundaries with my family, even going so far as to ask my mother not to bring that up anymore. But she couldn't help herself. She was so fixated on the outcome she wanted, a happy reunion between me and my abuser, that it became clear she would never let it go. One day she called to chat and ended up admitting to me that she and my father had decided that I was partially to blame for the abuse by my half-brother's adult friend. This admission blew my mind. It really broke me. It took me 4 months of intensive self-therapy to be okay again. It has now been almost 2 years since I've spoken to my mom or dad. I miss my mother frequently, but I cannot reconcile with her beliefs about me. In essence, by blaming me, I feel that she's accusing me of being a whore at the tender age of 9. It just doesn't make sense. I wish that I could say that I have it all figured out. It all seems clearer when I write it down, but the truth is, in spite of it all, I miss my mother and I mourn for our relationship. She was always the safe parent. She was the fun one, the creative one, the affectionate one. And she thinks I participated willingly in my own abuse. Sometimes I start to think maybe I should just forgive her and have a relationship again. She's getting old and she isn't a horrible person compared to some. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to have a relationship with her when I know she has such a warped way of thinking and doesn't respect my boundaries. Looking back, I can recognize how my parents' beliefs about me have affected their parenting of me. They've both been guilty of treating me unfairly and being emotionally, mentally, and physically abusive toward me. I understand that with all his narcissistic tendencies, it's possible that my father isn't capable of feeling empathy, but he's a very intelligent man who gives the impression that he knows everything. So why doesn't he realize how ridiculous it is to blame a child for their own sexual abuse? I just don't understand, and I'm so tired of trying to make sense of it. I feel like my brain knows that our happy family was always a lie, but my heart almost longs to go back to that time when I didn't see it all so clearly. It's so painful to know the truth that I almost wish my mother had never admitted it. I wish there was some way to reconcile with her, but I wouldn't know where to start, and a big part of me doesn't believe it's possible. Thank you in advance. If you decide to read my letter, I'd be grateful for your insight and advice. Sincerely, someone trying to heal. And then she added, P.S. Rereading my letter, I had the epiphany that my parents were actually my 2 most significant abusers, emotionally and mentally speaking. So why do I feel so guilty for saying so? Why do I feel disloyal for admitting that? All right, Leah, I think I can help. Wow. I think a lot of people are their heart is flying out right now. I'm sure people are in tears listening to your story. A lot of people have been through something similar. I've been through something a little bit similar, and I do understand, and I think I can shed some light on this. It's so helpful when it's not you who's going through it, and you can look at somebody else's experience, and certain things become a little more transparent then. So let's go through what you said. Oh my goodness. So your brother, 11 years older, he was 14, you were 3. That's when he started abusing you, and it went on for years. You were taught about forgiveness, and you feel that you have forgiven him because he was still a child and he was a victim of sexual abuse himself. And yeah, that makes sense to me, how you can simultaneously understand how somebody did that But because of how they're still acting about it, it's not reconciled. Because they're sort of blaming you for having some problem about it, you can forgive, and but you can't like let them around your kids. And I just love you for that. I love you for having that clarity. You can have both. But the problem really begins, as you've correctly said, that your parents knew that he was abused, and I guess it's your father's child from a previous relationship, and they knew that he was sexually abused. The mother allowed her boyfriends to abuse him, and your dad and your mom never sought help for him, and then he abused the 6 younger siblings. And they knew that. And, the symptoms you're talking about, I've seen these before, and some people might call it narcissism. It's got some like sociopathic, psychopathic type traits in it. I'm not a therapist. I can't really diagnose, but this thing about lighting things on fire and taking the lug nuts off the tire in hopes that people would die, that is somebody with some serious bad ideation and lack of empathy or prediction of outcomes. I'm so sorry, Leah. I had somebody like that in my family, and it was hard because certainly my mother, didn't want to see it either, and didn't want to address it. And a lot of bad stuff happened to me as a result of his crazy behavior. So your brother, like mine, got involved in other illegal activities and began using drugs at a young age. My father, who had authoritarian parenting style, told him to straighten up or leave, and he left, and he went back to his birth mom, who had actually got him abused in the first place. So that could only have been out of the frying pan and into the fire. It was he never got a healing break out of any of this. So when you were 9 and he was 20, he came home and brought with him some guy probably in his 30s. And a little bit I'm just like, what was that relationship, right? Because if your half-brother had been abused all this time and he was with this much older man and brings him home, why do I get the feeling that there was some sort of like coercive relationship going on there too? And that man proceeded to groom and ultimately abuse you for the majority of that summer. I don't know, I have a feeling there was more. There was even more from that guy. During that time, your father sensed something but asked you, was there anything inappropriate? And that's sort of like, I just like, okay, good, Dad, you asked, but your dad just wasn't aware enough to know, like a 9-year-old girl. I totally get the fear dynamic. You can't tell on anybody. You can't trust him. You were afraid he would kill the guy or get killed or go to prison. And I think you're right. I think with your dad's temper and the seriousness of what was done to you and the way your dad would have made it about him, and like an affront to him, I don't know. I think you might have been right that all hell would have broken loose. So you were sure you'd be blamed too. And gosh, you were, weren't you? You were sure you knew it when you were 9 and it was proven true as an adult. You knew you would be blamed. And that is what narcissistic families do. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So the abuser left abruptly. Your older sister told your father with this tiny little detail that hadn't actually happened. It was a tiny thing compared to the really huge abuses that did happen. But your father was like, did you do that? Did you do that? And that is just so narcissistic to do, and so insensitive, and so not getting it, and so not taking you to a private place to create a gentle, listening environment where you would be safe to talk about what happened. You didn't get any of that. It was all him, just like in his rage. So you told him what he wanted to hear. Makes sense to me. And then as the abuser walks away, your mother says, go run and say goodbye. So your mother is the fun one and the safe one, but she's also got some issues. And, I don't know what she was like before she married your dad, but being married to a guy like him probably did a number on her. But this codependent thing where if somebody's been abusive, it's like, oh, go hug them, go be nice to them. You don't want them to be sad when they're getting kicked out for abusing the kids, right? And the little thing he did, I'm not even gonna say what it was, but it was definitely kick out time. No, not appropriate. So then you eventually told your sister, she told your mom what really happened, your mom thought about it, and then she got angry at you. And why is that familiar to me? She got angry at you. Now, why do you think that is? I think I know. I think that your parents felt like real screw-ups and real failures. For them to have their kids sexually abused on their watch demonstrates that they were checked out. They were not doing what parents' number one job is to protect their kids. number one job is to deal with the mental health challenges of the kids, like your brother. And they didn't. And so in a narcissistic dynamic, you make them look bad. By having this happen to you, you make it obvious that this has happened. So you are the person disrupting the la-la fantasy that actually everything's okay in the family. Actually, everybody gets along. You're just this unforgiving kid, just can't let it go. And there it is. That's why they do it. And I think on some level, they kind of know what they did, but it takes so much rigid denial to be able to contain something like that and just carry on with your life like it never happened. You have kids, I have kids. You can imagine what it would feel like if you found out something like that had happened to your kid. It would be terrible. I mean, just think of the denial and the stuffing down and the lying to yourself you'd have to do to believe that it wasn't your fault, it was the kid's fault. So then you describe your teens and early adulthood with drama, suicidal thoughts, behavior, and growing up with the screaming and poverty. And by some miracle, you married a man who's really wonderful and loves and supports you. I'm just so grateful that that happened. That's kind of a long shot for somebody who's been through what you've been through. There's so often this pattern of going for somebody who really just makes it worse, but not you, Leah. Good job, lucky break, just happy for you. The problem is your parents are obsessed with the fact that you won't allow your abuser back into your life or around any of your children. And I wasn't sure if you meant the older man or the half-brother, but I know the half-brother is at least part of it. So they're convinced that true forgiveness means you welcome the person back with open arms. Yes, if they take responsibility for what they did and are contrite. But if they're a threat to children, you're just being a good mom. And you being a good mom right in front of them, Leah, let's think about what that means. You can't be a good mom in front of them, or it will contrast with their bad parenting, where they looked the other way, blamed you, abandoned you with what was going on, where they weren't present enough, where they didn't have that close relationship with you. So they, you have to be the black sheep, and it's unfair and it's horrible, but you being detached from them right now is so much better than you being there trying to do a little performance of being who they want you to be so that they don't have to feel bad about what they did and failed to do. That's not right. So your brother did this fake apology. Good, I didn't feel better. No, of course you didn't. You were smart. Of course not. There was no reason to believe anything was different. That was very lucid of you. Good work. And then you tried to have boundaries with your family, and you went so far as to ask your mom, just stop bringing it up that I forgive. And she just couldn't help it. She couldn't help it. She was fixated. And again, I'm going to guess that that's because she needs everybody to act like a happy family so that she can believe that she didn't do anything wrong. And that's how it works. I don't know, there but for the grace of God go we, of, just making such terrible mistakes that we would have to lie to ourselves to such a degree that we alienate our kids. What a horrible situation. I'm so glad you're doing better than that, Leah. I mean, really, you've broken the generational cycle. So she couldn't do it. And one day she called to chat. She ended up admitting that she and your dad had decided, I'm laughing, it's not funny, but it's just so ridiculous. They decided that you were really partly to blame for the abuse by your half-brother's adult friend. And it blew your mind, as it should. It really broke you. Yeah, it took you 4 months of intensive self-therapy to be okay again. I get it. I'm guessing that their rationale is that, well, we asked you, but you lied and said no, so I guess, it's your fault. That's just the stupidest thing I ever heard. 9-year-olds? I know 9-year-olds. I was a 9-year-old who had to lie about things. I just know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm really proud of you for doing what you needed to do to prevent absolute chaos and violence from breaking out, for trying your best as a little girl to sort of contain the trauma that had happened, considering what was in your best interest. You were actually working in your best interest the whole time. It was bad enough that you were abused, you weren't confident it would be dealt with, and you did what you had to do to prevent things from getting even worse and getting blamed. So now that you're old enough and you have your husband and you have perspective, them blaming you, now is the time when it's just handy that comes out for you to just go, okay, I'm not crazy. Yeah, they blamed you for that. Only people in grave denial of their own role could possibly blame a 9-year-old girl for what a 30-something-year-old did to her. My God. So you say, you miss your mom, and you have this conflict going on that she's still like doing this crazy blame game, and you miss her and you mourn it, and that's natural. You know, that just goes to show what a heart you have. You're a big-hearted person. You have love. You have a capacity to love people despite what they've done and hold boundaries. Yes! You are a whole person. You're doing this, and given that you're a mother, this is very good. Good work, Leah. Good work. So yeah, she was fun and creative and affectionate, and you always say she was the safe parent. Yes, by comparison, but she didn't stand up for you. And I don't mean to rub it in, but I mean sometimes it just helps to admit, like, this feels bad because she did not perform the number one duty of a mother, which is to keep the kids safe, right? That's why it feels bad. And you've done everything you can to try to have a relationship, to try to recruit her to help you have boundaries around this, and she won't. And who knows, maybe someday, maybe she'll come around, but probably not, you know? I'm sorry to say. So you think, oh, I should just forgive her and have a relationship again. But I think what you mean by forgive, I think you have forgiven her, but I think you're trying to have a boundary. So I think what you're really saying is maybe I should abandon my boundaries and abandon the safety of my kids and my sanity and just have a relationship with her again by playing along with the lie. And I'm not saying it's all black and white, like, oh, it's either you cut her off from your life or you participate in the lie. It doesn't have to be both. Well, I just encourage you, don't participate in the lie. Like, hold on to your truth. You don't have to fight about it if you have contact again, but don't participate in the lie. And I just love you have this kind of peaceful dignity around your truth, and I like that, and I hope you can hold on to it even when you're around the sort of hectic, dysregulating feeling of being near people who are bullshitting you. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to have a relationship when I know she has such a warped way of thinking. That's right. And her negative view of you that makes you feel that they consider you a whore, oh my God. I don't know if she said that or that's just what it touches off, but you are not. You are a beautiful and whole woman who grew up from being a girl, and despite the bad things that happened to you, you grew up like a lotus, just pure and beautiful. And you know what's true and you know what's right. And you have spent a lifetime successfully healing. I'm so proud of you. So yeah, I think your dad might be unable to feel empathy occasionally. When people are closer to death, they will relax a little bit, like the fear that people are going to realize the truth. It seems to melt a little bit sometimes. So I wouldn't give up hope that they're going to take responsibility for all of this. But what I would encourage you to do is to not tie your own healing or peace with this to anything that they do or realize about it. Like, see if you can make peace with, they are just broken people who are incapable of seeing this. You had said the happy family lie, your brain knows. And you wish that, like, oh, if only I'd stayed in the lie, but that wouldn't have been good. You know what was happening in the lie? That's when you were a teenager. That's when you felt like you wanted to die. And people who are recruited to participate in a lie, that's often how it feels. Like they just feel like, I can't exist, I can't bear this. So what's happening now is you're out in the sunshine of truth, and you've got tears of grief that you didn't get the childhood that you deserved, that you can never get back. And I'm just proud of you that you have such wisdom and grace about these people's mistakes that you're able to carry on. You wish there was a way to reconcile with her. Let's just see, let's just see. You keep getting stronger. I know she's getting older. Just hang out with, I think there's a way to sit with your truth without having to convince anybody else of it sometimes. That might be something you can experiment with. I think a lot of the people who watch this will be like, don't go back. I cut off contact. It was the best thing I ever did. But I really respect all choices about this. It's an incredibly important relationship, and I respect however you try to handle this, even if you need to adjust it periodically, first this way, then that way, and just kind of see what happens. But no matter what, don't go back into the lie, Leah, okay? I hope that helps. If you love this topic, I want to direct your attention to a video that I have. It's another letter writer, and this video is called "That You Don't Need Your Abuser's Cooperation to Heal." Very related to this one. It's right here, and I will see you very soon.